Welcome to In His Grip with Dr. Chuck F. Betters, produced by Mark Inc. Ministries. Each In His Grip message is designed to help turn our hearts toward Jesus and equip us to walk by faith. Let's join Dr. Betters in the sanctuary as he preaches the series, Midwives of the Messiah.
These were real people like us with real problems, and Hebrews 11 gives us the summary of their life and does so in a very positive way, but at the same time points us back to the stories about these people so that we will read those stories and understand that what we're dealing with here are sinful people, people who miserably failed at times in their lives, because the stories of Hebrews 11 are not about the characters of Hebrews 11. The stories of Hebrews 11 are about the grace of God. It is about the mercy of God. It is about God doing God's thing in building this great thing we call the covenant and bringing us in, grafting us Gentiles into this promise of the covenant in building his church. And now he is gathering his elect from the four corners of the earth to bring to climax human history. And so when you're reading Hebrews 11, you're actually reading the history of the Old Testament. And pretty much everybody that needs to be mentioned is mentioned in Hebrews 11, or at least referred to. In the middle of this passage in Hebrews 11, when he talks about this hall of faith, he mentions a woman, a very important historic figure in Israel's history. This woman is also mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus. When the Jews assembled their genealogies, it was very rare that a woman's name would be included in the paternalistic system in which they lived. But as we talked about last week, there are 5 women whose names appear in the genealogy of Jesus. And so I have begun this series last week, and we're continuing it today, and we'll finish it when we talk about the 5 women God used to shape Christmas. One of them appears in Hebrews 11 as well as in Matthew's account of the genealogy, as we'll see a little bit later on. So look with me at verse 31 in Hebrews 11, and then we're going to go back and visit her story in Joshua chapter 2. It says, Hebrews 11:31, by faith, Rahab, oh, wait a minute, we skipped something there. Rahab, you see what I missed? By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Now, if you are reading this in the New Testament context, this Hebrews letter was written, of course, to Jewish people who understood the story of Rahab. Rahab to them was a legend. They knew the story of Joshua chapter 2. So now if you have that finger in Joshua chapter 2, let's go back for a moment and visit that story. Hebrews 11 does very little to focus on the sins of its listed heroes. It leaves their stories for that purpose. For example, we're told in Hebrews 11 about Abraham in faith, believing and trusting God. And that's all you read in Hebrews 11. But when you read the story of Abraham, you see that he was called by God, but delayed in that calling. He was not instantaneously obedient. In fact, he went into Egypt when God specifically told him not to move. God told him to go one place, he went another, got into all kinds of trouble down in Egypt, and became a trickster, kind of a liar, a hoax, at times an imposter, even willing to throw his wife under the bus. Well, his son Jacob did the same thing. Isaac did the same thing. And then his son Jacob did the same thing. And this genealogical sin pattern continued because Abraham was not always obedient. Yet he's a hero of Hebrews 11, as is Rahab. Rahab is here called in Hebrews 11 the prostitute. Now, it's interesting how some scholars have tried to change the name for a prostitute to, play a little bit on some of the ways in which the Hebrew letters are pointed and what have you, to say that the word prostitute doesn't really mean prostitute. They want to soften the word to mean landlady. She was kind of the landlady of this particular establishment. Well, you'd have to really stretch to get to that point. The Bible makes it very clear that this woman was a prostitute. Now, some Jewish scholars try to play down her role as a prostitute even more by inferring that she eventually married Joshua. Well, we know that's not true because the story of Rahab's life continues, and we realize as we read her story that she did not marry Joshua. She married Salmon, and we'll talk about him in just a moment. One thing is for sure, that Rahab became a princess of Israel, a respected princess of Israel. We know for sure, even when these blows, when scholars try to soften the blows about Rahab, we know one thing for sure: she became a hero in Israel. She became a testimony of God's faithfulness in Israel. And that really is what Hebrews 11 is all about. It's about the grace focus. Yes, she's called in Hebrews 11 the prostitute, but she's in the Hall of Faith. She's there being listed, and her picture is being posted for everyone to see. This is what she was, and by God's grace, this is what she is. And that really makes the story about God's grace and not about Rahab. And so when you study her life, you realize that the Bible has a lot to say about how God deals with the past, how he deals with the sins of the past. As counselors and as leaders and as pastors and elders, we often deal with people who are all messed up. There are a lot of you out there that are all messed up. I don't know how you got into so much trouble. You almost have to plot a strategy to get in as much trouble as some of you are in. And I say that not in order to be funny. I say that because it's really sad. And in the process of finding out how you got from here to here, how you got so messed up, so to speak, we inevitably have to deal with your actions of the past. What did you do here that brought you to this point? And then what pattern was established there that brought you to this point? And then how did you establish a separate pattern that brought you to this point? And then we have to wrap that all up and say, now let's take a look back at all of the decisions you made that brought you to this point. Now I've got to tell you, at some point along the way, when you're dealing with people who are messed up, you have to stand up as a man or as a woman and say, you know what? I made some bad choices. My past has shaped me to where I am today. Yes, I understand that, but there is nothing I can do about my past. I cannot change the past. I cannot change one decision that I made in the past. I can learn from it, or I can live there. I can either live in the past, or I can learn from the past and make decisions today that are going to affect me tomorrow in a way that will glorify God. That's what the grace focus is all about. God knew your past when he saved you. When he died on the cross, your past was already past for him. When he died on the cross for your sins, there wasn't one of them, even the ones you haven't committed yet, that he didn't hang there and die for. The sins that Christ atoned for include all of your sins, past, present, and future. That's grace. He has loved you with that kind of love. How often do we encounter people who insist that the dirt of their past precludes them from involvement in the church? We hear this all the time. Well, I'm not good enough to come to church. Well, they haven't met you yet, have they? Amen? They haven't met us. If they think that you've got to get cleaned up first before you come here, they haven't seen the dirty mess that we are. They miss the whole point. That is why we need Christ. We need Christ because we're unclean. We need forgiveness because we're guilty. We need cleansing because we're dirty. We need healing because we're sick. And if one thinks that somehow or another you can just clean up your act first and then come to Christ, let me know when you think you have become clean enough to approach this holy God on your terms. That's what Hebrews 11 is all about. That's what Rahab is all about. That's why the Bible tells us she was a harlot. She was a harlot. But when the people read about Rahab, they read about a hero. The reason that we must come to Christ is because we are dirty. Our pasts have shaped us. We have made bad choices. And that's why he says, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will spit you out of my mouth." Is that what he says? He says, "Come to me, all you who bear those burdens of the past, your life as a harlot, or whatever your sin might be. Come to me, and I will give you rest." That's something the world can't give you. The world can't give you that kind of rest. Joshua chapter 2, let's study this intriguing woman just a little bit deeper. It says, beginning with verse 1, "Then Joshua, the son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim, go over the land, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, 'Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land.' So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, 'Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land.' But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, 'Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from.'" This is the faith of an immoral woman, by the way. And you're finding out that her faith was imperfect from the very beginning. It wasn't based on what she was or did. Her story is great because of what God did through her. "Yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, the men left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of the flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. So the posses left, the gates are closed. The men are bedded down in a pile of weeds on top of this woman's roof, her place of, quote, business, unquote. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, "I know that the Lord has given this land to you." Interesting, the words that she chooses. She now speaks of the Lord in terms of her own ownership. "The Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard," now she gets specific, this is why we're afraid. "We have heard how the Lord," there's that word again, that covenant name, "the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea." Oh, I thought on National Geographic they disproved that, didn't they? There was no Red Sea, was there? It was literally a pond. They just kind of went over a pond. I don't know how Pharaoh's whole army got drowned in a little pond, but I thought we disproved that, didn't we? Well, not according to Rahab. We heard. This is why we're scared. This is why we're in lockdown. We heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. We heard what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites, east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord, here's her profession of faith, for the Lord, your God, is God in heaven above and on earth below. You see, what saved this woman was the same thing that saves all of us: the testimony of God's graciousness, God's goodness, God's deliverance. People are saved because they come to understand God has provided salvation. He has become the sacrifice. The deliverance that we have is because of the mighty invasion of God. We know that because Moses and the children of Israel, 1.2 million Jews, were standing there at the gate of the Red Sea with mountain complexes on the left and on the right, and with Pharaoh's army pursuing behind them. Straight ahead was the Red Sea. They had no other direction to look but up. And had our God not invaded them, had he not provided this miraculous divine invasion, Pharaoh's army would have swallowed them up and destroyed every single one of them. And the ones that Pharaoh chose not to destroy, he would have re-enslaved and brought back to Egypt. So it wasn't because of Moses. It wasn't because of Joshua. It wasn't because of the powerful army that these Israelites had formed. It was because God, in his mercy and grace, invaded them and empowered them and redeemed them and set them free. Rahab says, that's what I heard. And right now, I'm staking my claim on you guys. I'm standing where you are standing. I am going to go where you go. I'm aligning myself with your God. It's interesting that the character of her faith is such that the very first act of this newly awakened faith is for her to tell a lie. In verses 4 and 5, the woman had taken the two men and hidden them. And then she tells this incredible lie to protect them. Now, her faith had few advantages given the environment in which she was raised and given her past. She didn't have any mentors. She didn't have any godly grandmother. She didn't have any godly saint in the church that took her under her wing and said, you know what, now we're going to walk along together and I'm going to train you. She didn't have any of that. The woman was immoral. And what she had was a newfound faith. No one had opened the scriptures to her. No one had taught her the difference between supralapsarianism and infralapsarianism. She didn't know doctrine from a hole in the ground. She knew one thing and one thing only: God had redeemed this people. He had miraculously set them free, and that she was tired of her life the way it was, and was aligning herself, even at the point of great personal risk, with the two spies and the children of Israel. She lived in a city where everyone knew everyone else. You need to understand something. These cities weren't that big. When we talk about a city today, we think of Philadelphia or Wilmington or Karachi or, one of these places. Jericho was probably, according to what the scholars have researched on this, probably the length of one football field wide and the length of 2 football fields long. That's it. With a wall around it, with people living literally on top of each other. Her house was built into the wall. Her house was actually a part of the structure of the wall that he would eventually come down miraculously. So everyone in that city knew everyone else. Men were seen coming to her house on a normal basis. You didn't just pop in without somebody noticing it. When men came from various parts of the world, they would pass through Jericho. And those men would not go unnoticed because they had to pass through the gate. There was one gate that closed up the city. It was a gate that protected the wall that was around the city. And so when travelers came through, everyone saw them. The women were sitting out baking their bread, and the men were standing on the street corner talking to each other, and everyone knew everyone else. So when the spies came in, it was not unusual. They didn't have the word spies attached to their t-shirts. They didn't walk in and say, spies, like FBI, those big letters FBI, like they're really fooling somebody. Big letters that didn't say spies, they just walked in, and it wasn't unusual for men to frequent this woman's place. And by the way, it also wasn't considered in her culture to be that immoral. She had a respectable business. Prostitution was a respectable trade in Jericho. So she was not frowned upon. She was not considered the dirt ball of Jericho. She more than likely was a wealthy woman. But we know that when these men came in, everyone knew about it. Interesting, by the way, how she's spoken of later on in the New Testament. You don't have to turn to this passage, but listen closely to what James has to say in the New Testament. Listen closely and see if you pick up a parallel here. In James chapter 2, verse 21, it says, "Was not our ancestor Abraham?" Now, he's the hero. As far as a Jew is concerned, if you could trace your lineage back to Abraham, that made you somebody. So Abraham is the starting point of popularity for a Jew. James says, "Was not our ancestor Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar?" You see that his faith and his actions were working together. And the faith was made complete by what he did. James is talking here, by the way, about the relationship between faith that saves you and works that prove it. Like we have in Roman Catholic teaching today, there is a teaching about how your works will save you. In a lot of Protestant thinking, it's your faith will save you. And we've made this an either or. Well, it's not an either or. James says it's a both and. It's a faith that saves you, but from that faith comes the fruit of your good works, the evidence that your faith is real, the evidence that your faith is genuine, because what good is your faith if your works are not there? Your faith is dead. Faith without works is dead. Verse 24, he says, "You see that a person is justified by what he does and not by his faith alone." Now, he's just talked about the greatest hero of the Old Testament to the Jewish person, Abraham. In the very next breath, he says, James does, verse 25 of James 2, "In the same way as Abraham, in the same way, was not even Rahab considered," oh, I skipped a word, "Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead." Imagine that. The greatest of the Old Testament saints, Abraham, is mentioned alongside of the harlot Rahab. In fact, the issue is that of the relationship between Rahab's faith, that is what she believed. She'd already expressed that to the spies. "I believe in your God. I've seen what your God has done. I hear the stories of his deliverance. Your God now has become my God." That's one thing to say it. It's another thing to put your life on the line. which is what she did. She was willing to put her life on the line. She knew the city was going down, and she and her family with it. And she knew there was going to be great calamity, and there was going to be great bloodshed, but it didn't matter to her. She had already made her choice, and she aligned herself with the people of God. James chooses two examples. Abraham scorched by God in Genesis 15, where he questions whether or not God can really be believed. And that led to his willingness to release the thing most precious to him, which was his son Isaac. And here he uses Rahab, who hid the spies and lied about it to her own king, who had the authority to chop off her head, thus becoming a traitor to her own people. That's who Rahab was, a harlot who became a traitor to her own people. That's if you were going to evaluate her from the perspective of human life, from the perspective of man. Now, was she right? Was she wrong in lying? Could God have achieved the same things without her having to tell that lie? Norman Geisler, one of the theologians of today, says, yes, she was right in telling that lie. John Calvin says it's truth that matters to God, and that's what's precious to him, and she was wrong in telling that lie. I don't really know the answer to that question. All I know is that that lie resulted in great personal danger for her and for her family.
Thank you for listening. For the complete sermon, please visit markinc.org and click In His Grip. Join Dr. Chuck F. Betters in the sanctuary from Monday to Thursday on the In His Grip podcast.